Okay, the focused assessment by sonography in trauma, the FAST exam, is one of the earliest applications of bedside sonography that was widely investigated and established in our specialty and also in trauma, and continues to be extremely useful, especially in blunt abdominal trauma, and in certain instances can be helpful in penetrating trauma as well. The key concepts in the FAST exam are that we're actually not looking at organs, because the FAST exam is positive or negative based on the presence of free fluid in abnormal locations. So we're looking at potential spaces in the body where free fluid tends to accumulate. And once that concept is clearly understood, then it's apparent that since it's a potential space, the entire extent of that potential space should be checked for a full and complete evaluation. Now, just as a preview, there are going to be 10 potential spaces that we are going to evaluate, and they are 4 in the right upper quadrant, 1 in the subxiphoid area, 4 in the left upper quadrant, and 1 in the suprapubic area. And the 10 potential spaces by name are: in the right upper quadrant, we're going to check the pleural space for hemothorax. We're going to check the subphrenic space. We're going to check Morrison's pouch, which is the hepatorenal space. And then, really continuous with that, but just to make us think about it, is the inferior pole of the kidney, looking for free fluid there, which might have trickled up from the colic gutter or drained down from Morrison's pouch if it's a small volume. In the subphrenic area, we're going to check the pericardial space. In the left upper quadrant, the same 4 spaces as we checked in the right upper quadrant will be checked. That will be the pleural space, the subphrenic space, the splenorenal on the left, and around the inferior pole of the left kidney. And finally, in the suprapubic area, we're going to check 1 space. That's going to be the rectovesical space in the male and the rectouterine space in the female, also known in the female as the pouch of Douglas. So each of these spaces should be checked systematically in real time through all tissue planes to avoid overlooking small volumes of free fluid that have not completely filled the space. And I usually like to do it sequentially in the right upper quadrant from top to bottom, unless there's a serious concern for pericardial trauma or cardiac trauma, as in significant frontal impact and a motor vehicle injury without a seatbelt. Pericardial and traumatic hemopericardium and pericardial effusion is very unusual in large series of the FAST exam. So the most high yield order to do this in every situation is really to start with the right upper quadrant, where the free fluid is most commonly found, then go to the pericardium, and then go to the left upper quadrant, and then go into the suprapubic area. Certainly one can go in any order one wants, but most of the time it's appropriate to go in the same order on every occasion, so that by using an absolutely routine method, one doesn't miss anything out or overlook anything. In the right upper quadrant, most of the time we have to use the intercostal window. And actually, when we start the FAST exam, since speed is important here, we usually apply ultrasound gel in each of the 4 locations that we're going to be scanning prior to starting, so that we don't need to be concerned about that during the exam. I think it's sensible to do the entire exam in real time and then obtain images later. Intercostal window right here, parallel with ribs, probe pointed to the head of the ribs, same as we used to the intercostal approach to the gallbladder. Usually need to have quite a lot of depth here. Make sure that you have adequate gain to see the deeper structures. And in order to check the pleural space, we're going to check back here for mirror artifact, which is the appearance of liver above the diaphragm, with pneumothorax or pleural effusions, this mirror artifact, this appearance of liver signal above the diaphragm goes away, and instead of that there is a black area here caused by the free fluid in this location, none seen here. Next we're going to check, and again we're going to check through all the tissue planes. You can see me moving the probe here. Then we're going to check above the below the diaphragm right here. Again the same thing, scanning through all liver all tissue planes. Then we're going to move down and focus our eyes on the on Morrison's pouch, which is the interface between the liver and the kidney. And again, I scan all the way through the kidney disappears completely medially here, and then I scan all the way through, trying to stay off rib spaces and all the way to the back. So I'm scanning all the way through this from one side to the other. If there's any question, I can go transversely and scan right down along the kidney here to make sure there's no free fluid any location around the kidney whatsoever. And this concludes the right upper quadrant exam. In the subxiphoid area, we use the same technique we did for subxiphoid views of the heart by holding the probe mostly on the top, pressing down firmly towards the floor, and scanning through all the tissue planes from top to bottom here. And we're again assessing the pericardial space around here for free fluid. This requires a certain amount of pressure, and the heart's right behind the sternum, so the probe is almost parallel with the floor. If necessary, a longitudinal view like this, the short axis view of the heart in the subxiphoid region, can be used. As mentioned before, many of the trauma surgeons prefer this view right here. Is the IVC coming up, hepatic veins draining into the heart, and right here we see the pericardial sac right here, and again you can scan the entire extent of the heart like this. In the left upper quadrant, the same four spaces are going to be assessed as in the right upper quadrant. And first of all, we're going to assess the pleural space. Here's the diaphragm again. The pleural space shows the same mirror artifact as it did on the right, with the appearance of the spleen above the diaphragm. And again, scanning systematically through all tissue planes to make sure that there's no area there where we appear to lose our mirror artifact. This particular view is probably the hardest in the FAST exam, and the mistake that most people make when they're learning to do this is failing to put the probe far enough backwards. And you notice that my hand is almost touching the bed. This is characteristic for this view. And they fail to put the probe far enough cephalad. Notice that the probe is up quite far towards the patient's axilla. The diaphragm is a much higher structure than people often realize until they start doing ultrasound. This view tends to be more superficial, and oftentimes we can zoom in a little bit to make use of all our visual real estate on the screen. So once again, the four spaces that we're checking, the pleural space, the subphrenic, the subdiaphragmatic space right in here on the inferior side of the diaphragm, the splenorenal space, which is right through here, which is the analog of Morrison's pouch. We need to try and stay off the ribs as we scan all the way through all the tissue planes. You can see that's what's happening right here. And if we go over another rib space, and you can see the image going dark there as we went over the rib, and we can check the inferior of the pole of the kidney right here, and we might need to go down one more rib space to really get to the inferior pole. This is probably the best view that I'm able to get right here, but I think we can see that there's no fluid lying along here.